Alright, welcome back to EconTruth.com. This is the second follow-up video to the original video, which was the story of the broken window. And the purpose of these follow-ups is to kind of just expand on some of the lessons to be learned from the broken window story, which again is what I think is anybody who wants to understand economics, it ought to be the first story or first lesson that you receive is the broken window story. So we're just going to expand on that. The first follow-up, just back up and recap real quick, is on the surface of the story, it's really this moral, which is that you do not become more prosperous by destroying your property and then spending productive effort to rebuild that property. That on the net, that's a bad decision. You'd be much better off not destroying your property and then spending the productive effort to expand on the property that you already have, rather than rebuilding it and then just, or destroying it and then just rebuilding it, which is really, on the surface, that's kind of the whole point of the broken window story. But if you dig deeper, I think there's more lessons, and maybe even broader, like more applicable lessons to be found from the broken window story. And the second one I want to talk about in this video is the idea of comparing the seen result compared to the unseen result that didn't happen. Okay, so it's kind of a little bit more abstract, maybe. So in the broken window story, imagine that Roger never stepped forward. Imagine that there was no Roger, and he never corrected Mr. Smith and explained that Mr. Baker was going to buy something else with his money, this $100 that was saved. The people would have, the next day, they would have seen this new window. They would have been able to touch it and knock on it, and it would have been there, it would have existed. This window that existed, this new window, as a result of the previous window being broken. They would have seen it. The jobs that were created by this broken window, or we already know they weren't really created, but the jobs that resulted from this broken window of building a new window, those jobs would have existed. They would have been there. They would have been real. But would people really have been able to look through this brand new sparkling window and see that the suit wasn't there, that the suit didn't exist, and been able to pick up on that and say, hey, there's a window, sure, but there isn't a suit. There isn't anything else that he was going to buy. Would people have really been that sharp or that observant to be able to realize that the money he spent on the window was going to be used for something else? It's like, I doubt it, I really do. And it's because it didn't exist. So you're comparing, you're trying to figure out what's better. Is the new window better or is the new suit better? But you can see the window and the suit doesn't exist. So it's kind of a really unfair advantage if you're just going to ask the common person which is better. You can't even see that the suit doesn't exist. And so it's a little bit of an abstract concept. So I guess I'm going to kind of rearrange the story to make it a little bit more realistic. So like, rather than say, maybe we don't break his window and make him buy a new one for $100, because that's, no one's going to do that in real life. There's no policy that comes forward and says, hey, we have this proposal that everybody is going to, destroy their car and then buy. Actually, we did kind of have that policy with the cash for, never mind, that kind of did exist. So no one's going to say, we're going to burn down your house so that you have to buy a new one or something, right? That's a little bit abstract. That's so far abstract that I think most reasonable people would understand that's not a good idea on the net. It might be good for some, but it's not good on the net. So let's make it more realistic. Let's say rather than destroy his window and make him buy a new one, let's say instead we're just going to take his $100, and with that $100 we're going to make him buy some new decorative fountain that's going to go in front of his house, and or in front of his store, and it's going to go on the street side, and it's going to make his store look nicer. It's going to make the community look nicer. This new fountain, right? So we're going to take the $100 and we're going to buy this new fountain. I am pretty sure that the people in that town, after that new fountain was made and after those new jobs were created in the fountain making industry, they would have seen the fountain, they would have seen the jobs, and they would have said this. They would have said, you know what? It is better to have that fountain than to not have that fountain. It is better to have those fountain making jobs than to not have those fountain making jobs. And thus, it is a good idea, it's a good thing that we took his $100 to create this fountain. We can see the fountain. It's there. It's good that it's there. It's better that it's there than if it's not there. And so it's a good thing that we did that. And that alone is justification for this policy to take Mr. Baker's $100 and make a new fountain. Well, I mean, hopefully you can see what's wrong with that thinking, is that you're not comparing whether or not the fountain's there or nothing is there. You're comparing if it's better that the fountain is there or whatever else Mr. Baker was going to buy with that $100. That's the question. It's not whether it's better to have the fountain or nothing. It's better whether it has the fountain compared to what else Mr. Baker would have had. But we don't know what that is. We can't see that. That wasn't allowed to become into existence because instead that money was diverted into the fountain. And it's hard to see that. And so I think that's another point of the broken window story, is that it's hard to see what doesn't exist. And just because it doesn't exist now doesn't mean that it wouldn't have existed. And we have to consider what else might have existed. And so this really applies, I think, to any kind of public project. You know, I like to use the example in my hometown. There was a program or a policy to build a new civic center in my hometown. I'm from a town of about 25,000 people. And this was a real controversial thing. Some people wanted it, some people thought it was too expensive. It was in the millions of dollars, I don't know the precise details. And you know, people said, well, it's going to help the community. It's going to have, you know, we're going to have the option of bringing concerts or performances or other kinds of things that we can host in this civic center. It's going to make the town nicer. It's going to help, you know, attract more people to this town, whatever. It's going to make our lives better. Which very well might be true. And I'm not, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that every public project is by default a bad idea. That's not the point here. The point is, it's not good enough to say that something is going to be a positive. That's not good enough. You have to prove that it's going to be better than the alternative. And the alternative isn't zero. The alternative to building a civic center isn't simply, well, we just don't have the civic center and that money's gone. I mean, obviously, if someone's going to give you money, you can either build a civic center with it or you have to burn the money. You're better off with the civic center than with nothing. But that's not the choice. That's not the choice of the townspeople. The choice is either do we have the civic center or do we have all of the things that people would have chosen to do with the money that they would have been spending on the civic center. Instead, they could spend it on their own. That's the choice. And I think that, you know, using my town as an example, I'm pretty sure that people who like the civic center, maybe they use it frequently or they go to concerts, when they see the civic center, when they go in the civic center, I think they have a feeling of pride and accomplishment. They say, boy, you know, this civic center wouldn't have been here if it weren't for our pushing this through and our, you know, getting the votes for this thing to pass and making this civic center. Otherwise, it wouldn't have existed, and it's better that it existed. But I don't think that those people, you know, they feel the good when they see what you can actually touch and see what really exists, the civic center. But I don't think they often would drive by some other family and say, I wonder what it is that they didn't buy. You know, boy, it's a shame that, you know, they were going to build a new deck onto their house, but now they can't because that money instead went to the civic center. Or, you know, when you walk by somebody in a store and you walk by somebody in Walmart, do you see them and you say, I wonder what, you know, boy, it's a shame that that guy didn't make that extra trip up to see his kids in college or something, or that family, that they don't eat out more often because they really like to eat out. That really makes their life better, but they can't do that now because instead they bought the civic center. And so, you know, the point here is simply that just because something exists and it didn't exist before doesn't mean that that the choice was either it exists or it didn't. The choice is either it exists or the things that otherwise would have exist will exist. And there's such a disadvantage there because one of them actually does exist, and the other ones you have to speculate, you have to guess. You don't really know what would 25,000 people have done with the extra, like $500 that they would have had that instead went into the Civic Center. Like, what would they have done with that money? And is the you know, total value of what each individual person would have done with that extra money, is that actually better for the community than the Civic Center itself? That's the question we need to ask. Not is the Civic Center better than nothing, because it's not nothing that you're comparing it to. And so it's not only that we can't just look at something compared to nothing, but we have to compare something compared to something that doesn't exist. And that's difficult to do. It requires a lot of speculation, and it always is gonna, in our minds, it's gonna favor the thing that actually does exist. And the last thing I want to make on this, it's really, I mean, this isn't like, it's not really that abstract. You know, if you imagine a person, you know, just yourself, like you have a budget and you have a disposable income and you have this money, you know, I could say to you, hey, look, like, your life would be better if you had a pool in your backyard. If you had a pool and you had it open in the summertime, your life would be better. It would be better to have a pool compared to not having a pool, and so therefore you should buy a pool. It would be stupid not to buy a pool. You know, obviously you would say, well, wait a minute, a pool costs this much money. With that same money, I could do something else. You know, what if I took your money and I built you a pool and I said, hey, look, the pool's there, otherwise it wouldn't have been there. You wouldn't have had that pool if it weren't for me, and so I, like, created this pool. You know, it doesn't work like that. Like, you otherwise would have been able to have something else. And you would see that, but somehow, like, when we step away from it as an individual and we look at it as a group, we always kind of ignore, like, what else people would have been buying with the money, which is the main consideration you have to do when considering whether or not a public project is actually better than the alternative, which is just letting the people keep the money on their own. And it's such a disadvantage when you're trying to compare something that exists, that you can see, that you can touch, that's really there, compared to something that's not seen because it never was allowed to exist, but it's not, like, not real. It really is what you need to compare. And the fact that it doesn't exist is just such an unfair advantage to make you think that what does exist is the better option just because it exists. And so you have to keep an open mind about that. You always have to consider the alternatives to public projects, which is the things that people would otherwise, you know, do with their money. And that usually, and I mean, I tend to think that people are pretty good about deciding what to do with their money in order to help their lives better than I would be. You know, imagine, like, so imagine you have $2,000, say, and you're going to use that in a way that's going to best help your life. Do you really think that I have a better solution of what to do with that money for how to improve your life than you do? It's like, I think you would probably be the expert on how to spend that money to best improve your life, at least much more of an expert than I would be on how to spend that money to best improve your life. And so I tend to think that generally our best value is letting people spend their own money in ways that they think helps their lives better than deciding as a group what helps, you know, your life as a group, because I certainly wouldn't know what helps your life. You would. So that's really the point of this blog, is the seen versus the unseen. I think that's another lesson we can take away from the broken window story. Stick around, there's much more to come on EconTruth.com.